And so going south has always seemed to me, since that time, like I'm coasting downhill. And going north has always seemed to me like a very difficult uphill climb, just from that trip. Now, we were going home. My parents never made any bones about it. We were going home when we went home in the summer to Winchester, Kentucky. They had been exiled, like so many in the late years of the Depression, by the need to find jobs. And so they had moved to Akron, Ohio, some 7 years before I was born. But they never called Akron, Ohio, home. And while I might have wanted to, my friends were there, I went to school there, I never felt as at home there as I was able to feel when I reached my grandmother and my aunts and my cousins in Winchester. And my grandmother would sit with me on her front porch in Winchester and name everybody who went by. And it turned out that everybody who went by was a cousin. They mattered. And that was very important to me. So, born in Akron, I came to know the South as a I guess you'd call it an insider by genealogy. But I also, of course, knew myself as an exile and an outsider. And of course, like any exiled person or outsider, I think I saw into the essences of things because I was in that position. Flash forward, many years later, I found myself entering the South again. My second way of getting into the South happened when I was in graduate school at the University of North Carolina. 40 years ago this year, and yes, I was a child prodigy too. I could only have been 10 years old when this happened. As I was casting about in some frustration, looking for some field in graduate school to be an expert on, and some writer or theme or something to write a dissertation on. I was having a hard time because I wasn't really much of a scholar, seriously speaking. I met someone who was going to be drafted into the Army, and he didn't know where he was going to go, and so I didn't really want to go anywhere or do anything. Not good reasons to stay in graduate school, but I didn't have a better plan. And there was only one book that had really gripped me, I guess we could say. Something I thought I might study. And so I went to one of my professors. His name was Louis Rubin. He had been at Hollins College when I was there as an undergraduate, because my parents had sent me back south for college. And so I went to Louis Rubin, and I confessed to him that in 2 years of study, only this one book really touched me in a way I didn't understand why. And I was pretty sure that I would have a hard time convincing anybody to let me do a dissertation on it, but I knew that if anybody would, it would be Louis Rubin, because some 15 years before, he had been in a doctoral program at Johns Hopkins University. And he had gone to his people in his department there and told them that he wanted to do his dissertation on a Southern writer who hadn't been dead for very long. And he wanted to call him a Southern writer to boot, which in the late 1940s, there really wasn't such a thing. The writer he wanted to write about was Thomas Wolfe. And his English department advisors said, "Oh, no way." But then, because he was a persistent man, a man who has now written 50-some books and established an important national press, etc., we know to be persistent. They told him that if he could find anybody in the university to direct a dissertation on Thomas Wolfe as a Southern writer, they would let him do it. And so he went over to the history department and buttonholed the man who is probably the most important Southern historian of the 20th century, a man named C. Van Woodward. And C. Van Woodward said, "Of course." So Louis Rubin had had some experience with people who want to do their dissertation on funky things. And so when I walked in and said, the only thing I've really enjoyed since I've been in graduate school is Brer Rabbit. He didn't even break a sweat. He just took me by the elbow and walked me down to the hall to the office of a good friend of his, whom he had just been very instrumental in getting the University of North Carolina to hire. The man was the first African-American full professor to be hired at the University of North Carolina, and his name was Blyden Jackson, a foremost African-American scholar on African-American literature. And between the two of them, Lewis Rubin and Blyden Jackson got me through the program and got me a dissertation, which got me a job, which got me a book, which allowed me to keep the job. And from there on, it just kind of kept going in that way. So I have made my way, a symbolic and not geopolitical Southerner, to the South as a child of exiled parents, and then as a student and a writer and a teacher, who entered the South through the door of one book and then another, until 40 years later, I had in my head and in my heart a whole world built of both print and experience in being in the South. Whether we were born here or dragged here, wish we were here or wish we could get out, we are, by means of geography and memory and our profession and our presence here today as teachers, we're here, and the South encloses us for good or ill. And we don't have a whole lot of choice about that. You may think you do, but I will beg to differ. With some examples from some literary texts, primarily. But before I go on, I have to say that I believe my title to be a grave misnomer in one respect. I've been going through hundreds and hundreds of folders and yellow pads of notes, trying to find something I could throw away after 40 years of teaching. And I realized that when I'm at my best in my job, I hadn't really been teaching the South at all. The longer I presented the South in literature to my students, the more it seemed better for both me and them not to deliver information or lead discussions, but in the manner of letting the fingers do the walking, let the text do the talking. My job with my students was to read the text, and it got so every time I taught a text, I had to read the whole thing again. I could never go in there without reading it as my students were reading it. And then as we read, to cast as wide and imaginative a net as possible, a contextual net around the readings. And then to trace the interplay between and among them, and to set up configurations of works that would allow collisions between and among the things we read and the things we saw in the world around us, and the history that became increasingly available to us through primary materials that we can now find as easily as we can type the words "Doc South" into the internet. So I want to show how this works, though, with a current context. And I love it when this happens, but it always happens when you teach the South in the South. Something will happen that will help set up everything you want to do. And this happened 2 weeks ago in Raleigh, North Carolina, in our Raleigh News and Observer, when probably our leading, or at least most highly paid columnist, who used to be the book editor, wrote a long piece entitled "A Public Monument to an Ugly History." And in this piece, he announced a very startling conclusion, or maybe not. But he had decided that the memorial to the Confederate dead that has long stood on the grounds of the Capitol in Raleigh must go. And I'll quote him. He said, "Since it was erected in 1895, the 75-foot-high statue has been the city's signature symbol. It long reflected the values and attitudes of the community, of most white citizens, that is, who ruled the city through laws that disenfranchised African Americans. But now," he wrote, quote, "in 2009, this monument honoring the lost cause no longer reflects the feelings of North Carolinians. It had been," he said, and I quote, "born in hate, conceived, erected, and sustained by the poisonous racial politics of white supremacy. And now in 2009, quote, "The time has come for the monument to die." It remains, he said, Raleigh's signature symbol of an ugly past, representing values and ambitions that no longer reflect who we are. Governor Perdue, he finished grandly, tear down this monument. And this is our context. It doesn't take long to find one when you're studying Southern literature and looking at the parallel universe outside your classroom windows and wondering which one is the real one and which South is the real one. But there are, of course, many ways of looking at the Confederate Memorial. And I think to see it as a signature symbol of the state's shameful defense of an indefensible slave system is valid enough. I think seeing it as something conceived of in hate goes beyond the intentions of the citizens, and they were indeed white citizens, but especially the intentions of the women who were primary in raising the money for that monument. Because, of course, they were still mourning their 40,000 son dead from that mistaken and certainly lost cause. So when you look at that monument, when you visit Raleigh, and around on the other side is another monument, a monument to those who died in the Vietnam War, another lost cause, certainly. There are many ways that you might see it, including the one that our book editor chose. I like the way of looking at that I once heard a Yankee comedian say, and only a Yankee comedian would have said, that the Southerners were the only people who liked to build trophies to themselves when they lost. But I'd like to look at it in a third way. When I read the column, what struck me most about it was the columnist's assertion that the monument as a symbol represented, quote, values and ambitions that no longer reflect who we are, and that it, quote, no longer reflects the feelings of North Carolinians, and that it is for that reason that the time had come for it to die and to be torn down. And certainly, we've seen sea change after sea change in the way that we and North Carolinians feel about the South and its past.